the heart of Chicago, where glass towers scrape the skies and the streets below buzz with relentless energy, there exists a world of stark contrasts. In the high-rise offices overlooking the city, lives are measured in deals, deadlines, and wealth. But on the streets below, life is simpler, more raw and unpolished, where people hustle for their next meal and cherish small acts of kindness. Ethan Walker, a reclusive tech millionaire, sat perched in his corner office on the 52nd floor, gazing out at the cityscape he'd helped shape. Despite his success, a gnawing emptiness had grown within him, a question he couldn't shake. What does it mean to be truly happy? Far below, at a bustling intersection, a young woman named Sophie Carter stood in stark contrast to Ethan's life. With her hair tied back and a tray of homemade candy in her hands, she greeted each passing driver with a smile. Her warmth radiated across the chaos, her kindness a quiet rebellion against the indifference of the world around her. Ethan, captivated by her unshakable cheerfulness, couldn't stop watching. What was it about this candy seller that intrigued him so deeply? And why, with all his wealth, did he envy her simple smile? Unbeknownst to him, this question would take him on a journey he never expected, a journey that would challenge his understanding of life, love, and the value of connection. The hum of the city filled Ethan Walker's office as he leaned back in his leather chair, letting his eyes wander away from the screens that displayed stock prices and project reports. Beyond the polished glass windows, Chicago was alive. Cars honked, people bustled, and the city pulsed with unrelenting energy. Yet amidst the chaos, one figure stood out, the young woman selling candy at the traffic light below. Ethan had noticed her weeks ago during a late-night brainstorming session. From his vantage point, she was just a small figure in a sea of hurried commuters. But even at a distance, her energy was unmistakable. She greeted each car with a wide smile, her tray of colorful candy held firmly in her hands. It wasn't just her persistence that caught Ethan's attention. It was the way she carried herself. Her head held high, her movements graceful. Despite the rush around her, she seemed to radiate a kind of peace that Ethan couldn't quite understand. "She's back again," Ethan muttered to himself, his voice breaking the stillness of his office. "Who's back?" Rachel, his assistant, peeked her head through the door, a stack of documents in her arms. Ethan hesitated. How could he explain that he'd been fixated on a stranger selling candy? "Nobody," he replied, brushing it off. "Just someone interesting down there?" Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "You've got a meeting in 15 minutes, she reminded him before disappearing down the hall. Ethan turned back to the window, but his thoughts were far from the boardroom. Who was she? Why did she smile so much? And how could someone with so little exude such happiness when he, with everything, felt so disconnected? The curiosity began to consume him. Over the following days, Ethan found himself drawn to the window, at the same time each afternoon, watching as Sophie greeted car after car with the same enthusiasm. She seemed to know many of the drivers, exchanging brief but cheerful conversations with them before moving on. Ethan's admiration soon turned to self-reflection. What was missing in his life that someone selling candy could seem so much richer in spirit than he was? Each day, he found new excuses to stand by the window, his work forgotten as he observed her. One evening, Ethan found himself in his spacious penthouse, the city lights twinkling below. He couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just fascination anymore. It was a yearning to understand her world. He realized he wanted to know her story, to learn the source of her joy and resilience. But how could he approach her? As Ethan Walker, billionaire tech entrepreneur, people only saw his wealth, not him. If he approached Sophie as himself, would she even be genuine with him? He feared his status would overshadow any chance of an authentic connection. That night, an idea took root, a bold, unorthodox plan. If his wealth was the barrier, then he would remove it. He would meet Sophie not as a millionaire, but as a man living a simpler life. He would disguise himself as someone ordinary, just to see her world through her eyes. The city lights shimmered like stars as Ethan Walker stood on the balcony of his penthouse, his gaze fixed on the skyline. His mind, however, wasn't on the shimmering wealth of Chicago or the towering skyscrapers he once took pride in. It was on the candy seller, Sophie Carter, and the idea that had been consuming him for days. What if he could meet her without the weight of his reputation or his wealth? Could he uncover what made her shine so brightly amidst her modest life? Ethan had decided he would step into her world, leaving his identity behind. Ethan paced the sleek marble floors of his penthouse. The spacious, meticulously designed apartment, with its modern art and panoramic city views, seemed hollow that night. He called out, "Rachel, I need you to come over." Rachel Hayes, Ethan's sharp and loyal assistant, had grown accustomed to his unconventional requests, but this one would test her limits. 20 minutes later, she arrived, her heels clicking against the floor as she stepped inside. "Ethan, it's 10 p.m. What's this about?" Rachel asked, dropping her bag onto the couch. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "I need to meet someone," he began, his voice calm but determined. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's new. You avoid people like the plague. Who's caught your attention?" He hesitated, knowing how ridiculous it would sound. "A candy seller at the intersection near my office." Rachel stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "You're serious?" "Completely," Ethan said. "She's different, Rachel. I've been watching her for weeks." "Wait, watching her?" Rachel interjected, narrowing her eyes. "This is starting to sound creepy." "It's not like that," Ethan protested. "She's remarkable. She's kind, optimistic, and happy. I need to know her story. But if I approach her as myself, she'll see the money, not me." Rachel sighed, sitting on a bar stool. "So, what's the plan? You're going to ditch the suits, grow a beard, and wander into her life?" "Something like that," Ethan admitted. Rachel laughed, shaking her head. "You're insane. But also, you're my boss. So, what do you need?" The next morning, Rachel arrived with a bag of old clothes she'd borrowed from her brother. She placed them on the counter with a smirk. "These should do the trick. Don't worry, they're clean." "Mostly?" Ethan eyed the clothes. A faded flannel shirt, a pair of worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers. "This is what people wear?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "Normal people, yes. You'll blend right in." The transformation was surprisingly easy. Ethan traded his tailored suits for the humble attire and tousled his usually neat hair. Rachel handed him a pair of old glasses. "Lose the polished look and stop standing like you're about to close a billion-dollar deal." Ethan practiced his new persona in the mirror, mimicking casual postures and relaxed expressions. "How do I look?" "Like someone who lives paycheck to paycheck," Rachel teased. "It's perfect." Before he left, Rachel grabbed his arm. "Ethan, be careful. This isn't some business deal. If you're not honest about your intentions, it'll backfire." Ethan nodded. "I know. That's why I have to do this right." Ethan arrived at the park near Sophie's usual route. He sat on a weathered bench, his heart pounding. His usual confidence was replaced by nerves as he scanned the park, waiting for Sophie to appear. By late afternoon, Sophie came into view, walking briskly toward the park after her shift. Her tray of candy was tucked under her arm, and her cheerful demeanor hadn't faded despite the long day. Ethan fidgeted with his glasses, trying to look natural. As she passed, he waved awkwardly. "Good afternoon," he said, keeping his voice steady. Sophie stopped, her eyes studying him briefly, before breaking into a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she replied. Her voice was kind, unguarded. Ethan gestured to the candy tray. "You sell these at the intersection, right? I've seen you there a few times." She nodded, her expression still friendly. "Yes, I do. It's hard work, but it helps pay the bills. Would you like one?" She held out the tray. Ethan reached for a piece of candy, fumbling in his pocket for cash. "Looks good. How much?" $2, she said. He handed her the money and took the candy, unwrapping it carefully. "Do you make these yourself?" "Yes," Sophie said, her tone proud. "My grandmother taught me how. People seem to like them, so I've stuck with it." They chatted briefly, and Ethan marveled at how easily Sophie treated him like any other person. There was no pretense, no calculation in her words, just genuine kindness. As Sophie walked away, Ethan sat back on the bench, candy in hand. He felt a strange mix of emotions, admiration for her resilience, guilt for hiding his true identity, and a growing curiosity about the life she led. Back at his penthouse that evening, Ethan replayed their conversation in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of excitement that wasn't tied to his work or wealth. It was something deeper, an opportunity to connect with someone who seemed to possess the happiness he'd been searching for. The cool evening breeze swept through the park, rustling the leaves of the towering oaks and carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass. Ethan Walker sat on the same weathered bench he had claimed the day before, adjusting his glasses nervously. His palms felt clammy, a strange sensation for someone who was usually composed, even in the face of multi-million-dollar decisions. Today, however, wasn't about business. It was about Sophie. The candy Sophie had sold him yesterday sat unopened in his pocket. He had spent the entire night thinking about her, the way she carried herself, the way her smile seemed to brighten even the dimmest corner of his mind. Sophie wasn't just cheerful. She exuded a kind of peace Ethan couldn't quite understand, but desperately wanted to. Sophie appeared on the path, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park. She looked tired, her steps a bit slower than the day before, but her smile remained intact as she approached the bench where Ethan sat. "Back again?" she asked, tilting her head slightly as she stopped in front of him. Ethan chuckled nervously, running a hand through his slightly disheveled hair. "Yeah, I guess I liked the candy too much to stay away." Sophie laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. I wasn't sure if it would be your thing." Ethan motioned to the bench. "Care to join me? You look like you've had a long day." She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, setting her tray of candy on the ground beside her as she took a seat. "Long but good," she said. "And you? You seem like you've been waiting for someone?" He shrugged, trying to keep his tone casual. "I guess I just like the park. At this time of day, it's peaceful." Sophie nodded, her gaze drifting to the children playing on a nearby swing set. "It is. I come through here most evenings. It's a nice break before I head home." The two sat in comfortable silence for a moment, before Ethan spoke again. "So, do you sell candy every day? Seems like hard work." Sophie turned to him with a small smile. "Every day, rain or shine. It's not easy, but it's honest work, and it's enough to keep things going for me and my grandma." Ethan leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. "Your grandmother lives with you?" "She does," Sophie replied, her voice softening. She raised me after my parents passed away, so now it's my turn to take care of her. She's been sick lately, so most of what I make goes toward her medicine and doctor visits." Ethan felt a pang of guilt as he listened. Here he was, sitting on a bench in borrowed clothes, pretending to be someone he wasn't, while Sophie carried the weight of her family's struggles with grace and humility. "That's a lot to take on," he said quietly, "but you seem to handle it well." Sophie shrugged, her smile turning wistful. "You learn to find joy in the little things, like selling out a tray of candy or hearing my grandma laugh when I tell her about my day. Life isn't perfect, but there's always something to be grateful for." Ethan stared at her, his admiration growing with each word she spoke. Sophie's perspective on life was unlike anything he had encountered in his world of wealth and ambition. She wasn't driven by the pursuit of more. She was content with what she had, no matter how little it seemed. As their conversation continued, Ethan found himself relaxing, his initial nerves melting away in the warmth of Sophie's demeanor. They talked about everything from her favorite candy recipes to the best spots in the park to watch the sunset. Sophie's laugh came easily, and Ethan couldn't help but smile along with her. But as the evening wore on, a nagging sense of guilt crept into Ethan's mind. He was enjoying their connection, but it was built on a lie. Would she still smile at him like that if she knew who he really was? "You've got a good heart," Sophie said suddenly, breaking through his thoughts. "Most people don't bother to ask about my day, let alone listen." Ethan swallowed hard, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "Well, I guess I just think it's important to get to know people." Sophie smiled again, her eyes softening. "That's rare these days. Thanks for that." Ethan forced a smile, but inside he was wrestling with his own deceit. He wasn't ready to reveal the truth, not yet, but he promised himself he wouldn't let his disguise take away from the genuine care he was beginning to feel for Sophie. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Sophie glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should get going. Grandma will be waiting." Ethan stood as she did, brushing imaginary dust off his jeans. "Thanks for sitting with me. It was nice talking to you." "Same here," Sophie said. She picked up her tray and gave him one last smile. "Maybe I'll see you around." "Yeah," Ethan said, nodding. "I'll be here." As Sophie walked away, Ethan watched her until she disappeared down the path. He sat back on the bench, staring up at the stars and replaying their conversation in his mind. He had only just begun to scratch the surface of who Sophie was, but already she was changing the way he saw the world. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps it was just the realization that happiness wasn't as far out of reach as he had always believed. The following weeks slipped into a steady rhythm for Ethan. Each day, he would leave his towering office, shed the layers of his corporate persona, and head to the park in his humble disguise. It became his sanctuary, a place where the pressures of his tech empire faded, replaced by the simple joy of Sophie's company. Sophie, with her tray of candy and ever-present smile, seemed to greet each evening with the same warm enthusiasm. Ethan marveled at her ability to find light in the smallest of moments, and slowly their conversations became a cherished part of both their routines. Ethan sat on the familiar bench, watching the last golden rays of sunlight filter through the trees. He fiddled with the edge of his flannel shirt, a nervous habit he'd picked up since adopting his disguise. Sophie's silhouette appeared at the edge of the park path, her tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. "You're here again," she teased as she approached, her voice light and welcoming. Ethan grinned, I could say the same about you. Well, someone has to make sure this city doesn't run out of candy, Sophie quipped, setting her tray down beside the bench before sitting next to him. Lucky for the city, Ethan replied. But isn't it exhausting, working all day like this? Sophie shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It can be, but it's worth it. I've got my grandma to take care of, and one day I hope to open a little candy shop of my own. Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. A candy shop? Her eyes sparkled as she spoke. Yeah, a small place, maybe near a school or so, or in a nice neighborhood, somewhere kids and families can come, not just for candy, but for a sense of community. My grandma always says candy has a way of bringing people together. Ethan leaned back, letting her words wash over him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard someone speak with such genuine passion about a dream. It was so different from the calculated ambition that defined his corporate world. Their conversations often wandered, touching on everything from Sophie's childhood to the quirks of her daily routine. Ethan learned that her grandmother, Edith, had been a school teacher for decades, before illness forced her into early retirement. Sophie spoke of her grandmother with reverence, her love and admiration shining through every word. Grandma's the strongest person I know, Sophie said one evening, her voice tinged with pride. She's the one who taught me to find joy, no matter how tough things get. When I was a kid, we didn't have much, but she always made it feel like we had everything. Ethan smiled, imagining a younger Sophie running around a small, cozy house filled with the scent of homemade candy. She sounds amazing. She is, Sophie agreed, her gaze softening. That's why I work so hard. I want to give back to her, to make her life easier. She deserves that, and so much more. Ethan's chest tightened. He thought about his own parents, how his father's obsession with building wealth had left little room for connection or affection. He envied Sophie's bond with her grandmother, the sense of purpose it seemed to give her. As their routine meetings continued, Ethan's guilt grew. He loved the simplicity of their connection, but it was built on a lie. Sophie believed he was just another struggling soul, someone who understood her hardships. What would she think if she knew the truth? That he was a millionaire who could solve her problems with a single phone call? One evening, as Sophie told a story about a particularly difficult customer she'd dealt with earlier, Ethan couldn't help but ask, "Doesn't it ever feel unfair, working so hard and still struggling?" Sophie paused, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. Life isn't always fair, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. Besides, I've got so much to be thankful for. Grandma, my health, and even the people I meet every day. Complaining won't change anything, but gratitude, that makes the hard days easier. Ethan stared at her, awed by her perspective. In his world, fairness was dictated by contracts and negotiations. Gratitude was a concept rarely discussed, let alone practiced. Despite Ethan's efforts to blend into Sophie's world, his wealth found ways to intrude. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, a sleek black car slowed nearby. Ethan recognized it immediately, one of his company's executives. He turned away, hoping to avoid recognition. "Everything okay?" Sophie asked, noticing his sudden discomfort. "Yeah," Ethan said quickly. "Just thought I saw someone I knew." Sophie didn't press further, but the moment lingered in Ethan's mind. It was a stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds, a gap he wasn't sure he could bridge without revealing everything. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Sophie brought up her dream again. "You know," she said, "if I ever do open that candy shop, you'll have to come visit. I'll give you free samples, just for being a loyal customer." Ethan laughed. "I'd be honored. But don't you think you'll make more money if you charge me?" Sophie grinned. "Maybe, but some things are more important than money." Ethan's laughter faded as he considered her words. For Sophie, life wasn't about wealth or status. It was about connections, the joy of small moments, and the love she shared with her grandmother. It was a stark contrast to the world Ethan inhabited, and he couldn't help but wonder, could he ever truly be a part of her life? That night, as Ethan walked back to his penthouse, he made a silent decision. He couldn't keep living this double life forever. At some point, he would have to tell Sophie the truth. But not yet. Not until he could be sure that the bond they were building was strong enough to survive the revelation. For now, he would continue meeting her, learning from her, and cherishing the moments they shared. Because for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was truly living. The warm hues of dusk painted the streets of Sophie's neighborhood as Ethan trailed behind her at a safe distance. The usual bustle of the park gave way to quieter, more subdued sounds, a distant car horn, the hum of crickets, and the occasional murmur of voices from open windows. Ethan had always avoided intruding into Sophie's personal life, but tonight, curiosity and concern had gotten the better of him. He wanted to understand the full scope of her world, beyond the cheerful facade she presented at the park. And so, with a mix of apprehension and determination, he followed her home. Sophie's pace slowed as she turned onto a narrow street lined with small, aging houses. Paint peeled from the walls, and unkempt yards told stories of lives stretched thin. Ethan's heart tightened as he took in the surroundings, so far removed from the gleaming glass towers he called home. Sophie stopped in front of a modest single-story house. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a dim yellow glow on the weathered wooden steps. She opened the door, stepping inside without hesitation. Ethan lingered on the sidewalk, unsure of what to do next. Through the thin curtains of the living room window, he caught glimpses of the interior. The room was simple but tidy, with mismatched furniture arranged around a small TV. An elderly woman sat on a recliner, her frail figure swathed in a knitted blanket. Sophie knelt beside her, her face soft with concern as she spoke. Ethan couldn't hear their conversation, but the tenderness in Sophie's expression was unmistakable. He watched as she helped the woman, her grandmother no doubt, take a small sip of water before adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. A wave of guilt washed over Ethan. While he had been worrying about his disguise and the ethics of his deception, Sophie had been carrying the weight of her grandmother's well-being with quiet strength. As Ethan turned to leave, something caught his eye. Sophie crossed the room to a worn, bulky bag sitting on the kitchen table. She opened it carefully, revealing an organized stack of cash inside. Ethan froze, his curiosity piqued. Why would Sophie have so much cash? The amount seemed far beyond what she could have earned selling candy. She counted the money meticulously, her movements quick and practiced. Once satisfied, she zipped the bag shut and tucked it into a cabinet. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Was Sophie hiding something? Could there be another side to her story that she hadn't shared? The thought unsettled him, but he reminded himself that everyone had secrets. Whatever the explanation, he owed her the benefit of the doubt. Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind as he made his way back to his penthouse. The image of Sophie with the bag of cash lingered in his mind, raising doubts he didn't want to entertain. Could she be involved in something dangerous or illegal? Or was the money simply a product of her relentless work ethic? By the time he reached his building, Ethan's emotions were a tangle of admiration, concern, and guilt. He poured himself a drink, staring out at the city lights as he tried to make sense of what he had seen. She's not what she seems, he murmured to himself. But then, who was he to judge? He had spent weeks pretending to be someone he wasn't, all in the name of understanding her life. The next morning, Ethan recounted the night's events to Rachel over coffee. She listened intently, her brow furrowed. "Ethan, it sounds like she's doing everything she can to survive," Rachel said. "That bag of cash could be savings, or maybe she's handling something for her grandmother. You don't know her full story yet." "I know," Ethan admitted, rubbing his temples. "But what if she's in trouble? What if there's more to this than I realized?" Rachel sighed. "Then maybe it's time you stop tiptoeing around her life and start asking real questions. If you want to help, you need to be honest with her and yourself." Ethan nodded, though the thought of revealing his true identity still made his stomach twist. "I'll figure it out," he said. "I just need more time." Over the next few days, Ethan tried to act normal during his meetings with Sophie. He asked her about her candy business, her grandmother's health, and her favorite spots in the city. Sophie remained as cheerful and open as ever, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was a layer of her life she wasn't showing him. One evening, as they sat on the bench in the park, Ethan decided to broach the topic carefully. "Sophie, you've mentioned your grandmother a few times. She sounds like an amazing woman." "She is," Sophie said, her smile softening. "She's the reason I do what I do." "It must be hard, though," Ethan ventured, "taking care of someone and working so much." Sophie hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but I don't really have a choice. She's all I have, and I'd do anything to make sure she's okay." Ethan nodded, sensing her reluctance to share more. He didn't press further, but her words only deepened his resolve to uncover the truth, not out of suspicion, but because he genuinely wanted to help. As Ethan walked home that night, he replayed Sophie's words in his mind. There was no denying her sincerity, but there was also no ignoring the mystery of the bag. Ethan resolved to follow Sophie again, hoping to gain more insight into her life. He knew it was a risk, but he couldn't let his questions go unanswered. If there was even a chance that she needed help, he wanted to be the one to provide it. The shadows of Sophie's struggles loomed large, but Ethan was determined to step into the light and understand them fully, even if it meant risking everything. The night was unusually quiet, as Ethan found himself in a part of the city he rarely ventured into. Dim streetlights cast long shadows over cracked sidewalks, and the faint hum of music drifted from a diner up ahead. He adjusted his glasses nervously, his heart pounding, as he approached the building where Sophie had disappeared the night before. The diner's neon sign flickered above the entrance, its garish glow making the worn-out facade seem even more tired. Ethan hesitated outside, peering through the window. Inside, a handful of customers sat at scattered booths, their faces worn and weary. Behind the counter, Sophie was moving quickly, balancing trays and refilling coffee cups. This was her second job. Ethan slipped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly as he entered. The smell of greasy food and strong coffee filled the air, and a weary waitress glanced at him briefly before returning to her work. Ethan chose a corner booth, keeping his head low as he observed Sophie. She looked exhausted, but her movements were purposeful, efficient. Her uniform, a simple white blouse and black apron, was neatly pressed, though faint smudges of food and coffee hinted at the demands of her shift. Ethan watched as she approached a table where two men sat, their voices too loud and their gestures exaggerated. "Anything else I can get you?" Sophie asked politely, her tone steady despite the men's rudeness. One of them smirked, leaning back in his chair. "How about a smile to go with that coffee, sweetheart?" Ethan's fists clenched under the table, his jaw tightening as Sophie forced a polite smile and turned away. He could see the weariness in her eyes as she returned to the counter, refilling a coffee pot before heading to the next table. As the hours dragged on, Ethan pieced together a fuller picture of Sophie's life. This job wasn't glamorous or fulfilling. It was a necessity. It was clear she endured the long hours and disrespectful customers for the sake of her grandmother, a thought that both inspired and saddened Ethan. When Sophie finally took a brief break, she retreated to a small corner near the kitchen, leaning against the wall with a tired sigh. Ethan considered approaching her, but hesitated, unsure of how she would react to seeing him here. Instead, he signaled to a passing waitress. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice low. "The girl working over there, Sophie. She's incredible. How long has she been here?" The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, glanced over at Sophie. "That's Sophie for you. She's been with us for about a year, I think. Works double shifts most days, and she's always running herself ragged. Sweet girl, though. Always has a kind word for everyone, even when she's dead tired." "Doesn't she ever take a break?" Ethan asked, his concern evident. The waitress shook her head. "Not much. She's got her grandma to look after, you know. Medical bills piling up, from what I hear. She's doing the best she can, but it's not easy." Ethan's chest tightened as he processed the waitress's words. Sophie's sacrifices ran deeper than he had imagined. As Ethan's gaze returned to Sophie, he noticed her speaking to another server near the kitchen. Their conversation seemed tense, with Sophie gesturing toward the clock on the wall and the other server shaking her head. Sophie's shoulders slumped slightly as she walked back to the counter, her movements slower than before. Ethan decided he couldn't sit idly any longer. He left a generous tip on the table and exited the diner, his mind racing. Sophie's life was a constant struggle, and it pained him to see her enduring so much alone. That night, as he walked back to his penthouse, Ethan made a decision. He would use his resources to help Sophie, even if she never knew it was him. She deserved a break, and if he could provide one without compromising their growing connection, he would. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing Sophie's situation in his mind. He called Rachel, who arrived promptly with her ever-present notepad. "You look like a man with a mission," Rachel said, arching an eyebrow as she took a seat across from him. "I need your help," Ethan began. "Sophie, the candy seller. She's working nights at a diner, and it's taking a toll on her. I want to make things easier for her without revealing who I am." Rachel studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "So, what's the plan?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "First, I want to speak with the diner's manager. Maybe I can cover some of Sophie's shifts without her knowing. Second, I want to find a way to alleviate her grandmother's medical expenses." Rachel nodded, jotting down notes. "That's a start. But Ethan, you realize this can't go on forever. Sooner or later, she's going to find out about your involvement." "I know," Ethan admitted. "But right now, I just want to help. We'll deal with the rest when the time comes." That afternoon, Ethan visited the diner, this time without his disguise. He requested a meeting with the manager, a gruff man named Pete, who seemed more interested in his clipboard than in the conversation. "What's this about?" Pete asked, leaning against the counter. "I want to make an offer," Ethan said, his tone professional. "I'd like to cover the wages for Sophie's shifts for the next month, but I don't want her to know it's coming from me." Pete raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Why would you do that?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She's working herself to the bone, and I can afford to help. That's all." After a moment of silence, Pete nodded. "Fine. But if she asks, I'm not lying to her. Understood, Ethan replied. The following evening, Ethan returned to the park, waiting for Sophie. When she arrived, she looked slightly more relaxed, the exhaustion in her eyes less pronounced. You seem lighter today, Ethan observed as she sat beside him. Sophie smiled, her expression warm. Yeah, actually. The diner manager told me I could take a few nights off. I don't know how or why, but it's a huge relief. Ethan nodded, hiding his satisfaction. That's great. You deserve a break. As they talked, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Sophie, even in small ways, brought him a kind of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't about his wealth or his status. It was about making a difference in the life of someone who had unknowingly changed his own. The streets of Chicago were quieter than usual that night, the faint hum of distant traffic muffled by the chill in the air. Ethan Walker found himself back in Sophie's neighborhood, driven by a mix of curiosity and concern. He couldn't shake the image of her exhaustion at the diner or the mysterious bag of cash she had hidden at home. Tonight, he was determined to understand the full scope of her life. Ethan parked a few blocks away from Sophie's house, careful to remain unnoticed. He had wrestled with his decision to follow her again, questioning whether it was an invasion of privacy or a necessary step to truly help. Ultimately, his growing admiration for Sophie and his desire to ease her burden outweighed his doubts. From the shadows, Ethan watched as Sophie left her house, her tray of candy left behind. She wore a thick coat to combat the cold, her pace brisk as she walked through the dimly lit streets. Ethan followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding with anticipation. After several minutes, Sophie turned onto a side street, her destination coming into view. A small, nondescript building with peeling paint and flickering lights. A sign above the entrance read, Second Chances Community Center. Ethan lingered outside the center, peering through the windows. Inside, Sophie stood among a group of people, men and women of varying ages, each with a weary but hopeful demeanor. She moved through the room with ease, offering smiles and comforting words as she handed out meals and blankets. The center wasn't a place for personal gain. It was a safe haven for those in need. Sophie wasn't just working to support her grandmother. She was giving what little she had to help others. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched Sophie interact with the people in the room. Her kindness and selflessness were unmatched, and he realized just how little he truly understood about her sacrifices. After her shift at the community center, Sophie walked home, her pace slower this time. Ethan followed from a respectful distance, his mind racing with everything he had witnessed. Sophie's life was a delicate balancing act, one that required immense strength and resilience. As she reached her house, Sophie paused on the porch, glancing up at the stars. Ethan stopped in his tracks, staying just out of sight. For a moment, he considered stepping forward, revealing his presence and offering her the support she clearly needed. But he hesitated, fearing that his sudden intrusion might shatter the fragile trust they had built. Instead, he turned and walked away, vowing to find another way to help without disrupting Sophie's life. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline. His mind replayed the events of the previous night, the image of Sophie at the community center, etched into his memory. Rachel entered the room, her notepad in hand. You look like you've been up all night, she said, taking a seat across from him. What's going on? Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. Sophie's doing more than I ever imagined. She's not just working for herself or her grandmother. She's helping people at a community center. She's giving so much of herself, and I can't just sit here and do nothing. Rachel's expression softened. So, What's the plan? Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I want to support the center anonymously. Donations, supplies, whatever they need. And I want to find a way to ease Sophie's burden without making her feel like a charity case. Rachel nodded, jotting down notes. I can coordinate with the center's director. But Ethan, you need to be careful. Sophie might not react well if she finds out you've been orchestrating this behind her back. I know, Ethan said, but I can't stand by while she's carrying so much alone. Over the next week, Ethan's plan began to take shape. Through Rachel's discreet efforts, he arranged for donations to the community center, ensuring they received enough supplies to sustain their operations for months. He also worked with the diner manager to adjust Sophie's schedule, giving her more time to rest and recover. When Ethan met Sophie at the park that evening, he noticed a change in her demeanor. She looked lighter, her usual warmth accompanied by a hint of relief. You seem different, Ethan remarked as they sat on the bench. Sophie smiled, her eyes sparkling. Yeah, actually, the community center got a huge donation this week. It came out of nowhere, but it's been a blessing. We've been able to help so many more people. Ethan nodded, hiding his satisfaction. That's amazing. You deserve some good news. Sophie glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. It's funny, though. Sometimes I feel like things are starting to turn around, and I don't even know why. But I'm grateful, no matter where it's coming from. Ethan smiled, his chest tightening with both pride and guilt. He wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to let her know that she wasn't alone in her struggles. But he knew the timing wasn't right. Not yet. As the days passed, Ethan continued to balance his double life. He cherished his moments with Sophie, learning more about her dreams and aspirations, while secretly working to ease her burdens. But the weight of his deception grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, as they walked through the park, Sophie turned to him with a curious look. You know, you're a bit of a mystery, Ethan chuckled nervously. What makes you say that? Sophie shrugged, her smile teasing. You're always here, but you never talk much about yourself. It's like you're carrying some big secret. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Maybe I'm just not that interesting. Sophie laughed, shaking her head. Somehow I doubt that. But it's okay. Everyone's got their secrets. Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after they parted ways. He knew that his time was running out, that sooner or later he would have to tell Sophie the truth. But for now, he clung to the fragile connection they shared, hoping that his actions would speak louder than his words. The park was bathed in soft golden light as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the path. Sophie arrived with her usual cheerful energy, balancing a tray of unsold candy and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. Ethan was already seated on the bench, waiting for her. But tonight, there was something different about Sophie. An unmistakable lightness in her step, a hint of joy in her smile that seemed brighter than usual. As she approached, Ethan couldn't help but smile. You look like you've had a good day. Sophie chuckled, setting her tray down beside her before sinking into the bench. You could say that. Actually, it's been more than a good day. It's been incredible. Oh? Ethan asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. What happened? Sophie turned to him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. You're not going to believe this, but someone, an anonymous donor, paid for my grandmother's surgery, just like that. The hospital called this morning to tell me it's all covered. Ethan felt a surge of relief and pride, though he struggled to maintain his composure. That's amazing, Sophie. I'm so happy for you. I know, Sophie said, her voice trembling with emotion. I still can't believe it. This morning, I was worrying about how I'd ever save up enough money. And now, it's like a miracle." She paused, her expression softening. "I don't know who to thank. All they told me was that the donor wanted to stay anonymous. But whoever it is, they've changed my life." Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of joy and guilt. He wanted so badly to tell Sophie the truth, to let her know that he was the one behind the gift. But he also feared that revealing his secret too soon might shatter the fragile trust they had built. "Well," Ethan said after a moment, "whoever it was must have seen how much you've been through and wanted to help. You deserve it, Sophie." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you. And thank you for always being here to listen. It means more than you know." In the days that followed, Sophie's world seemed to transform. With her grandmother's surgery scheduled and paid for, a weight was lifted from her shoulders. Ethan noticed the change immediately. Her laughter came more easily, her steps were lighter, and her conversations were filled with hope for the future. One evening, as they sat together in the park, Sophie opened up about her dreams in a way she hadn't before. "You know," she began, twirling a strand of her hair between her fingers, "for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can actually think about the future, about what I want, not just what I have to do." Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "And what do you want, Sophie?" She smiled, her gaze distant. "I want to open a candy shop, a place where kids and families can come, not just for the candy but for the memories. My grandma always said that candy has a way of bringing people together." Ethan's chest tightened. He could see the passion in Sophie's eyes, the spark of hope that had been reignited. He wanted to be the one to help her realize that dream, but he also knew he had to tread carefully. Ethan spent hours in his office, brainstorming ways to support Sophie without revealing his true identity. He enlisted Rachel's help once again, and together they devised a plan to provide Sophie with the resources she needed to take the first steps toward her dream. "I want to help her open that candy shop," Ethan explained during one of their meetings. "But it has to feel like something she's earned, not a handout." Rachel nodded, jotting down notes. "We could set up a business grant in her name, frame it as an opportunity for small business owners in the community." "That's perfect," Ethan said. "Make it happen." Within days, the grant was established, and Sophie received the news in the form of an official-looking letter. She was stunned, reading it aloud to Ethan during one of their park meetings. "Congratulations," Sophie read, her voice trembling. "You have been selected as the recipient of the Second Chances Small Business Grant. This award is intended to help passionate entrepreneurs achieve their dreams." She lowered the letter, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't even know how this happened. I didn't apply for anything." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Maybe someone saw your potential and wanted to help?" Sophie laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's incredible. I've always dreamed of opening a candy shop, but I never thought it would actually happen." "Well," Ethan said, his tone warm, "it looks like your dream is a lot closer than you think." With the grant money in hand, Sophie threw herself into planning her candy shop. Ethan accompanied her to look at potential locations, offering advice and encouragement, while carefully maintaining his cover. He marveled at her determination and creativity, watching as she transformed each challenge into an opportunity. One afternoon, as they toured a small storefront near a bustling neighborhood, Sophie turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" You've been my sounding board through all of this, Sophie explained. You've listened to my ideas, encouraged me when I doubted myself, and reminded me that it's okay to dream. That means more than you know. Ethan smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. I'm just glad I could be here for you. Despite the progress they had made together, Ethan couldn't shake the guilt that lingered in the back of his mind. Every kind word Sophie shared, every moment of gratitude she expressed, felt like a double-edged sword. She didn't know the full truth, and Ethan knew that when she found out, it could change everything. One evening, as they walked through the park, Sophie brought up the anonymous donor again. I've been thinking a lot about the person who paid for my grandmother's surgery, she said, her tone contemplative. I wish I could thank them properly. They've given me so much more than just money. They've given me hope. Ethan's heart ached at her words, but he forced himself to remain silent. He wasn't ready to reveal his secret. Not yet. But he knew that moment was drawing closer, and he could only hope that Sophie would understand. The sun dipped low over the Chicago skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and gold. Ethan sat on his usual park bench, his hands clasped tightly together as he waited for Sophie. This was the day he had been dreading and anticipating for weeks. The weight of his secret had grown unbearable, and he knew he couldn't delay the truth any longer. Sophie arrived a few minutes later, her cheerful demeanor lighting up the park. She waved as she approached, carrying a small bag of candy samples she had been working on for her future shop. Hey, Ethan, she greeted, taking her seat beside him. I brought some of my new recipes for you to try. You've been my unofficial taste tester after all. Ethan forced a smile, though his heart was racing. Thanks, Sophie. I'm sure they're amazing, as always. She noticed the tension in his voice and gave him a curious look. You okay? You seem off today. Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself. Sophie, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Sophie's brow furrowed as she set the candy bag aside. What is it? Ethan hesitated, the words catching in his throat. But then he thought of everything Sophie had shared with him. The struggles, the dreams, the unshakable kindness she showed, despite her hardships. She deserved the truth, even if it risked everything they had built. My name isn't Ethan Walker, he began, his voice steady but low. Well, it is, but not in the way you think. I'm not just some guy who hangs out in the park. I'm the CEO of Walker Tech. Sophie blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. Wait, what? Walker Tech? As in the tech company? The one with the skyscraper downtown? Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. Yes, I've been running it for years. But when I first saw you selling candy at the intersection, I felt drawn to you. I didn't want my money or status to get in the way of getting to know you, so I disguised myself. Sophie stared at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and hurt. You lied to me? This whole time? Ethan swallowed hard, his voice pleading. I didn't mean to deceive you, Sophie. I just wanted to know you for who you really are, not as someone who might treat me differently because of my wealth. Her expression hardened, and she stood up, pacing a few steps away from the bench. So, all this time, while I've been spilling my heart out to you, you've been sitting there with a secret this big. Do you have any idea how humiliating that feels? I didn't mean for it to go on this long, Ethan said, rising to his feet. But the more I got to know you, the harder it was to tell you the truth. I didn't want to ruin what we had. Sophie turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. What we had? Ethan, I trusted you. I thought you were one of the few people in my life who didn't have an ulterior motive. And now I find out you've been lying to me from the start? Ethan took a step closer, his voice desperate. Sophie, please. I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did, the anonymous donation, the grant for your candy shop, it was all because I care about you. Sophie's breath caught, her eyes widening. The surgery, the grant, that was you? Ethan nodded, his expression filled with remorse. Yes. I didn't want you to struggle alone. I just wanted to help. Sophie's shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to feel about this. On one hand, you've done so much for me and my grandmother, things I can never repay. But on the other hand, you lied to me. How am I supposed to trust you now? Ethan's voice was soft, almost a whisper. I know I messed up, Sophie, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I had to tell you the truth, even if it means losing you. Sophie looked at him for a long moment, her emotions warring within her. Finally, she shook her head. I need time, Ethan. Time to figure out how I feel about all of this. He nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. As Sophie walked away, Ethan sank back onto the bench, his head in his hands. The truth was out, but the cost was higher than he had anticipated. He had risked everything to be honest with Sophie, and now all he could do was hope that their connection was strong enough to weather the storm. Over the next few days, Ethan kept his distance, giving Sophie the space she had requested. He focused on his work, though his thoughts constantly drifted to her. Every time his phone buzzed, he hoped it was a message from Sophie, but the screen remained blank. Nearly a week later, Ethan received an unexpected call from Rachel. You might want to check your email, she said cryptically. Ethan opened his inbox and found a message from Sophie. It was brief, but carried a weight of emotion. Ethan, I've thought about everything. Meet me at the park tomorrow, at 6 p.m. We need to talk. His heart raced as he read the words. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a chance to explain himself further, to show Sophie that his feelings for her were genuine. The following evening, Ethan arrived at the park 15 minutes early, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. He paced nervously near the bench, where he and Sophie had shared so many conversations, his thoughts a tangled mess of hope and fear. When Sophie appeared, she carried an air of quiet determination. Her posture was straight, her steps deliberate, and her face unreadable. Ethan's breath caught as she approached, her presence commanding all his attention. Hi, Sophie said simply, stopping a few feet away. Hi, Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. Sophie nodded, crossing her arms as she took a seat on the bench. Ethan hesitated for a moment before joining her, careful to leave a respectful distance between them. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Finally, Sophie broke the tension. I've been thinking about everything you told me, she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. And I'm still hurt, Ethan. The fact that you lied to me, pretended to be someone you're not, it feels like a betrayal. Ethan's chest tightened, but he nodded, his voice filled with remorse. I understand, and you're right to feel that way. I never should have lied to you. I thought I was protecting something fragile, but all I did was make it worse. Sophie turned to him, her gaze piercing. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth from the start? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because I was scared. Scared that if you knew who I was, you'd treat me like everyone else does, like a bank account instead of a person. I wanted to know you for who you really are, not through the lens of my wealth. Sophie frowned, her expression softening slightly. And what did you find out? That you're incredible, Ethan said without hesitation. You're strong, kind, selfless, everything I've been searching for but never thought I'd find. You've shown me what it means to truly care for someone, and I didn't want to lose that. Sophie looked away, her emotions swirling. Words are easy, Ethan. What matters is what you do. You've already done so much, helping my grandmother, setting up the grant for my shop. But I need to know that you're being honest with me from now on. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. I swear to you, Sophie, no more secrets. I'll be completely transparent, even if it means losing your trust again. I just want to be there for you. Sophie studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a slow breath. Okay, but this doesn't mean everything is fixed. Trust takes time, and I need to see that you mean what you say. I understand, Ethan said, relief washing over him. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. The next day, Ethan set his plan into motion. He began by addressing Sophie's working conditions at the diner. Though he had already covered some of her shifts anonymously, he decided to take a more direct approach. He met with the diner's manager, Pete, and explained his intentions. I want to make sure Sophie isn't being overworked or mistreated, Ethan said firmly. She deserves better. Pete raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And why are you so interested in her? She's important to me, Ethan replied simply. That's all you need to know. After some negotiation, Ethan secured a promise from Pete to improve Sophie's schedule, ensuring she had time to rest and focus on her shop. He also arranged for additional security measures at the diner, discreetly funded through a charitable donation. Ethan didn't stop there. He knew that earning Sophie's trust would require more than just behind-the-scenes actions. He began spending more time with her at the candy shop, helping her with everything from designing the layout to selecting suppliers. Each interaction was a chance to show her that his intentions were genuine. One afternoon, as they unpacked boxes of equipment for the shop, Sophie glanced at Ethan with a thoughtful expression. Why are you doing all this? Because I believe in you, Ethan said simply. And because I want to be a part of your journey, even if it's just in a small way. Sophie smiled faintly, her walls beginning to crack. You're not so bad when you're not pretending to be someone else. As the shop's opening day approached, Ethan surprised Sophie with a heartfelt gesture. He had commissioned a custom sign for the storefront, featuring her shop's name, Sophie's Sweet Haven. When Sophie saw it, her eyes filled with tears. This is perfect, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you, Ethan. You don't have to thank me, Ethan replied, his tone soft. This is all you. I'm just here to cheer you on. Sophie wiped her eyes, a genuine smile breaking through. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope that their relationship could heal. On the day of the grand opening, the shop buzzed with excitement. Neighbors and friends came out to support Sophie, filling the space with laughter and warmth. Ethan stood by her side, watching with pride as she greeted customers and shared her story. At one point, Sophie's grandmother arrived, her face glowing with pride. She pulled Ethan aside, her voice gentle but firm. Thank you for helping my granddaughter. She's been through so much, and seeing her happy again means the world to me. Ethan smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. She deserves all the happiness in the world. I'm just glad I could be a small part of it. That evening, after the shop had closed, Sophie and Ethan sat on the curb outside, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Sophie turned to him, her expression soft. You know, she began, I wasn't sure if I could forgive you. But seeing how much you've done, not just for me, but for the people around me. It's made me realize that you really do care." Ethan's heart swelled. "I do, Sophie. More than I can put into words." She smiled, a hint of warmth returning to her gaze. "Then let's take it one step at a time. I'm not ready to jump back in completely, but I'm willing to try." "That's all I could ask for," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. As they sat together, the tension between them began to melt away, replaced by a sense of possibility. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt hope, not just for their relationship, but for the future they could build together. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the streets as Sophie unlocked the door to her candy shop, Sophie's sweet haven. The smell of fresh paint and polished wood still lingered in the air, a reminder of the hard work that had gone into bringing her dream to life. She stepped inside, flipping the lights on and taking a deep breath. Today was a new day, not only for her shop, but for her journey with Ethan. Sophie spent the morning organizing shelves and preparing for the day's customers. As she worked, her mind wandered to the conversation she and Ethan had shared the night before. She had seen the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse for his actions, and the unwavering commitment to make things right. While her trust wasn't fully restored, a part of her was beginning to believe in his intentions. At precisely 10 a.m., the shop door jingled, and Ethan walked in, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. He looked around, taking in the cozy atmosphere of the shop with a smile. "Good morning," he said, his tone light but nervous. "I thought I'd stop by and see if you needed any help today." Sophie turned to him, her expression softening at the sight of the flowers. "Good morning, Ethan. You didn't have to bring those." He shrugged, setting the bouquet on the counter. "I wanted to. Consider it my way of supporting your grand opening, even if I'm a little late." Sophie chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, thank you. And actually, I could use some help restocking the shelves if you're serious about pitching in." "Absolutely," Ethan said, rolling up his sleeves. "Put me to work." As the day progressed, Ethan proved to be an enthusiastic helper. He carried boxes of candy, arranged displays, and even charmed customers with his easygoing demeanor. Sophie couldn't help but notice how naturally he fit into the rhythm of the shop. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, a side that felt grounded and sincere. During a quiet moment, Sophie leaned against the counter, watching Ethan help a little boy pick out a bag of gummies. The boy's laughter echoed through the shop, and Ethan's smile was warm and genuine. For the first time in weeks, Sophie felt a glimmer of the connection they had shared before the truth had come out. When the boy and his mother left, Sophie approached Ethan, her voice hesitant. "You're good with people. Have you ever thought about working in retail?" Ethan chuckled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Not exactly my expertise, but I'll take the compliment." Sophie smiled, her guard lowering just a little. "Well, you're welcome to stick around. I think the shop could use someone like you." Later that afternoon, as they took a break in the small back room of the shop, Sophie finally broached a topic that had been weighing on her mind. "Ethan, why did you decide to tell me the truth when you did? You could have kept pretending, and I might never have found out." Ethan set down his cup of coffee, his expression serious. "Because you deserve honesty, Sophie. I realized that if I wanted any chance of building something real with you, I couldn't keep hiding who I am. Even if it meant losing you, I needed to be truthful." Sophie nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "I appreciate that. It doesn't erase what happened, but it means something that you were willing to take that risk." Ethan hesitated, then spoke softly. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Sophie. But meeting you, it made me want to be better, to be someone you could rely on." Sophie looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You've done a lot to show me that, Ethan, and I want to believe you. But rebuilding trust takes time." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice steady, "and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." As the weeks went by, Ethan continued to be a constant presence in Sophie's life. He showed up at the shop almost daily, helping with everything from deliveries to customer service. He listened attentively as Sophie shared her ideas for expanding the business and offered thoughtful suggestions without overstepping. Sophie, in turn, found herself opening up to Ethan again. She shared stories about her childhood, her grandmother's influence on her love for candy making, and her dreams of one day creating a line of signature treats. With each conversation, the walls between them began to crumble. One evening, as they closed up the shop together, Sophie turned to Ethan with a small smile. "You've been pretty amazing these past few weeks. I didn't expect you to stick around this much." Ethan shrugged, his smile modest. "I meant what I said, Sophie. I'm here for you, for as long as you'll have me." Sophie hesitated, then reached out to take his hand. "I think I'm starting to see that." Their progress wasn't without challenges. One day, Sophie received an offer from a local business group to partner with her shop and expand its reach. The opportunity was exciting, but also intimidating, and Sophie felt torn about whether to accept. Ethan encouraged her to explore the opportunity, even offering to accompany her to meetings with the business group. "You've worked so hard to get here, Sophie," he said. "You deserve to take this next step." Sophie smiled, touched by his unwavering support. "Thank you, Ethan. It means a lot to have you in my corner." At the meeting, Sophie was poised and confident, impressing the business group with her vision for the shop. Ethan watched from the sidelines, his pride in her evident. When the partnership was finalized, Sophie turned to him with a wide smile. "We did it," she said, her excitement bubbling over. "No," Ethan replied, his grin matching hers. "You did it. I'm just lucky to be here to see it." As they celebrated the partnership's success, Sophie felt a sense of clarity. Ethan's actions over the past few weeks had spoken louder than any words ever could. He had shown her that he was willing to earn back her trust through consistent effort and genuine care. That evening, as they walked through the park together, Sophie stopped and turned to Ethan. "I think I'm ready to take another step forward," she said, her voice steady. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding. "What does that mean?" Sophie smiled, her eyes warm. "It means I'm willing to see where this goes, but only if we keep everything honest from here on out." Ethan nodded, his voice filled with emotion. "I promise, Sophie. No more secrets." As they continued walking hand in hand, Sophie felt a sense of hope that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The grand opening of Sophie's Sweet Haven marked a pivotal moment in Sophie's life. The shop had become more than just a business. It was a testament to her resilience, her determination, and the unwavering support she had received from those around her, especially Ethan. The candy shop stood at the heart of the neighborhood, its colorful sign inviting locals and passers-by alike to step inside and experience the joy Sophie had poured into every corner of the space. The morning of the opening was alive with anticipation. The street outside the shop was adorned with cheerful banners and balloons, and a small crowd had already gathered, eager to see what the new business had to offer. Sophie stood inside, putting the final touches on a display of her signature candies. Her grandmother sat nearby, beaming with pride, her health much improved since the surgery that had brought them both a new lease on life. Ethan arrived early, carrying a box of fresh flowers for the shop's counter. "Good morning, Sophie," he said with a warm smile. "How's the star of the day feeling?" Sophie chuckled, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Nervous, excited, overwhelmed. Take your pick." "You've got this," Ethan reassured her. "Everyone out there is here because they believe in you. And so do I." Sophie's eyes softened as she looked at him. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan waved off the sentiment. "This is all you, Sophie. I'm just lucky to be here to witness it." At precisely 10 a.m., Sophie stepped outside to cut the ribbon, signaling the official opening of the shop. The small crowd erupted into cheers and applause as she smiled and waved, her heart swelling with gratitude. Neighbors, friends, and even a few curious strangers filed inside, marveling at the colorful displays and the warm, inviting atmosphere. Ethan stayed in the background, quietly assisting where he could and watching Sophie shine. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as he observed her interacting with customers, sharing stories about her candy-making process, and radiating a genuine joy that was impossible to ignore. One customer, an elderly man, approached Ethan while sampling a piece of caramel. "This place is something special," he said with a nod. "You can feel the love that's gone into it." Ethan smiled, his gaze fixed on Sophie. "It really is. She's an incredible woman." As the day progressed, Sophie faced the inevitable challenges of running a new business. A batch of fudge turned out too soft, the credit card machine briefly malfunctioned, and the line of customers stretched farther than she had anticipated. But with Ethan's steady presence and a few deep breaths, she navigated each hurdle with grace. By mid-afternoon, the shop had settled into a lively rhythm. Children giggled as they chose their favorite candies, parents chatted over cups of coffee, and Sophie's grandmother greeted customers from her seat near the window. Sophie couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment as she looked around, taking in the vibrant energy of the space she had worked so hard to create. As the sun began to set and the crowd dwindled, Sophie and Ethan found themselves alone in the shop. The day had been a resounding success, but the weight of exhaustion was beginning to set in. Sophie sank onto a stool behind the counter, letting out a long sigh. "Long day," Ethan teased, handing her a bottle of water. "Long but worth it," Sophie replied, taking a sip. "I still can't believe this is real, that this is mine." Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You've earned every bit of it, Sophie. And it's only the beginning." Sophie smiled, her gaze meeting his. "I couldn't have done it without you, you know. You've been there every step of the way." "And I'll keep being here," Ethan said softly, "for as long as you'll have me." Over the next few weeks, Sophie's Sweet Haven became a beloved fixture in the community. The shop's unique candies and welcoming atmosphere drew a steady stream of customers, many of whom returned regularly to chat with Sophie and sample her latest creations. Ethan continued to play a quiet but supportive role, helping Sophie brainstorm marketing ideas, manage inventory, and even experiment with new candy recipes. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing day, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. One evening, as they closed up shop together, Sophie turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about expanding the business," she said. "Maybe offering candy-making workshops or partnering with local schools for educational programs." Ethan's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. You've got the passion and the talent to make it happen." Sophie smiled, her excitement bubbling over. "It's a little scary, but I think I'm ready for the next challenge." Amid the success of the shop, Sophie and Ethan's relationship continued to evolve. While the pain of Ethan's initial deception still lingered, Sophie found herself gradually letting go of her resentment. His consistent actions and unwavering support had begun to rebuild the trust they had once shared. One evening, as they walked through the park together, Sophie reached for Ethan's hand. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, her voice steady. "And I've realized that you've done more than just make up for your mistake. You've shown me what it means to be truly committed to someone." Ethan's heart swelled at her words. "Sophie, I'll never stop trying to prove myself to you. You mean everything to me." Sophie smiled, her grip on his hand tightening. "I believe you, Ethan, and I'm ready to move forward with you." With their relationship stronger than ever, Sophie and Ethan began to dream of a shared future. They talked about the possibilities that lay ahead, expanding the shop, traveling together, and finding ways to give back to the community that had supported them. As they stood together in the warm glow of the shop's lights, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced countless challenges and heartaches, but through it all, she had found something unexpected. A partner who truly believed in her, and a future brighter than she had ever imagined. The days following Sophie's Sweet Haven's grand opening were transformative. The shop not only became a hub for the community, but also a space where Sophie and Ethan began to forge a deeper bond. Their once complicated relationship started to feel simpler, more genuine, as they navigated this new chapter together. Each morning, Ethan arrived at the shop before it opened, carrying a cup of Sophie's favorite coffee and a willingness to tackle any task she needed help with. Whether it was organizing supplies, running errands, or brainstorming new ideas for the business, Ethan's presence became an integral part of Sophie's day. "I think we need to add seasonal flavors," Ethan suggested one afternoon, leaning against the counter as Sophie mixed a batch of caramel. "Seasonal?" Sophie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Think about it," Ethan continued. "Pumpkin spice in the fall, peppermint bark in the winter. People love that stuff." Sophie chuckled, shaking her head. "You might be onto something, but only if you're willing to be my taste tester." Ethan grinned. "You've got yourself a deal." As their days together became more routine, their conversations grew deeper. Sophie shared memories of her childhood, painting vivid pictures of the moments that had shaped her love for candy making. She spoke of her grandmother's influence, the challenges of growing up without her parents, and the joy she found in creating something that brought happiness to others. Ethan, in turn, opened up about his own life, something he rarely did with anyone else. He spoke of the pressure of running a company, the isolation that came with his wealth, and the mistakes he had made along the way. "I used to think money could solve everything," Ethan admitted one evening as they sat on the shop's front steps, watching the sunset. "But then I met you, and I realized how much I've been missing." Sophie looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're not the same person you were when we met, Ethan. I can see that, and I think you're starting to see it too." Despite the progress they had made, Sophie and Ethan's relationship was tested once again when an unexpected opportunity arose. A well-known food blogger discovered Sophie's shop and wrote a glowing review, leading to a surge in business. While the increased attention was exciting, it also brought new challenges. "We're going to need more stuff," Sophie said one evening as she went over the day's receipts. "I can't keep up with this pace on my own." "I can help you hire," Ethan offered. "We'll find people who share your passion and vision for the shop." Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but only if you promise not to take over. This is still my business." Ethan held up his hands in mock surrender. "I promise. I'm just here to support you." The hiring process was a learning experience for both of them. Sophie was meticulous in her interviews, ensuring that each candidate understood her values and the importance of creating a welcoming atmosphere for customers. Ethan provided guidance when needed, but respected Sophie's decisions, letting her take the lead. By the time the new employees started, the shop had become a well-oiled machine. Sophie's leadership shone through, and Ethan couldn't help but admire her even more. "You're a natural at this," he told her one evening, as they closed up the shop. "You've created something incredible." Sophie smiled, her confidence growing with each passing day. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ethan, but I think I'm finally starting to believe in myself." As the shop flourished, so did Sophie and Ethan's connection. They spent their evenings walking through the park, sharing dreams and hopes for the future. Sophie began to trust Ethan in ways she hadn't before, and Ethan found himself opening up in ways he never thought possible. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Sophie turned to Ethan with a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "What made you want to keep coming back after everything that happened?" Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "Because I knew you were worth it. Even when I messed up, I couldn't walk away. You've changed my life, Sophie, and I don't want to imagine it without you." Sophie's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she felt a sense of peace about their relationship. "You've changed my life too, Ethan, more than I think you realize." With the shop thriving and their relationship on solid ground, Sophie and Ethan began to discuss ways they could give back to the community. Inspired by Sophie's story and the support she had received, they decided to create a program that provided small grants to local entrepreneurs with big dreams but limited resources. "We'll call it the Sweet Futures Initiative," Sophie suggested during one of their brainstorming sessions. Ethan smiled, nodding in agreement. "Perfect. It'll be our way of paying it forward." The program quickly gained traction, and Sophie and Ethan found themselves working side by side to select recipients and mentor them through the process. The experience brought them even closer, reinforcing their shared values and commitment to making a difference. One evening, after a long day of planning, Ethan surprised Sophie with a small box tied with a ribbon. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Open it and see," Ethan said, his smile enigmatic. Sophie untied the ribbon and lifted the lid to reveal a delicate charm bracelet, each charm representing a milestone in their journey. A candy shop, a park bench, and a small heart. "It's beautiful," Sophie said, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you, Ethan." Ethan took her hand, his gaze steady. "It's a reminder of everything we've built together, and everything we still have to look forward to." As they stood together in the soft glow of the shop's lights, Sophie felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought her to a place she never thought possible, a place of love, trust, and partnership. "I think we're finally figuring this out," Sophie said with a smile. Ethan chuckled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I think so, too." As the night unfolded, Sophie and Ethan knew that their bond was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of honesty, resilience, and a shared vision for the future. The city skyline shimmered in the twilight as Ethan led Sophie to a secluded rooftop overlooking the bustling streets below. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fresh blooms, arranged meticulously across the balcony. A table set for two awaited them, adorned with soft candlelight and delicate silverware. This was not just another evening. It was a moment Ethan had envisioned for weeks, a culmination of their journey together. Sophie stepped onto the rooftop, her breath catching at the sight. The golden hues of the setting sun painted the scene with an ethereal glow, and the subtle strains of a string quartet drifted through the air. She turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with surprise. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. Ethan smiled, his heart pounding. "Just a little something to celebrate how far we've come." Sophie laughed softly, shaking her head. "You didn't have to do all this, Ethan." "I wanted to," he replied, offering his arm. "Come on, let's make it a night to remember." As they dined on a carefully curated meal, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Sophie spoke of her latest ideas for expanding the shop, her excitement shining through with every word. Ethan listened intently, his admiration for her growing with each passing moment. "You've built something truly special," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "To Sophie's sweet haven, and the amazing woman behind it." Sophie blushed, clinking her glass against his. "And to you, Ethan, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Their eyes met across the table, the unspoken connection between them deepening. It was a moment of quiet intimacy, a reminder of everything they had overcome to reach this point. As the meal concluded, Ethan stood and extended his hand to Sophie. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Curious, Sophie allowed him to lead her to the edge of the rooftop, where a small dais had been set up. The city lights sparkled in the distance, creating a breathtaking backdrop. Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious, yet filled with warmth. "Sophie," he began, taking her hands in his, "I've spent my entire life chasing success, thinking it would bring me happiness. But then I met you, and you showed me what truly matters." Sophie's breath hitched, her eyes searching his. "Ethan, you've taught me the meaning of resilience, of love, and of what it means to truly care for someone." Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine my life without you in it, and I don't want to." Reaching into his pocket, Ethan pulled out a small velvet box and knelt before her. He opened it to reveal a delicate ring, the diamond catching the light like a star. "Sophie Carter, will you marry me?" For a moment, Sophie was too stunned to speak. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the man before her, his vulnerability and love on full display. She thought of everything they had been through, the lies, the forgiveness, the growth, and knew her answer without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." Ethan's face broke into a wide smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Rising to his feet, he pulled her into his arms, their embrace filled with joy and relief. The string quartet began to play a celebratory tune, and the rooftop was filled with the sound of their laughter and applause from the small group of staff who had helped Ethan plan the evening. The rest of the evening was a whirlwind of celebration. Ethan and Sophie danced under the stars, their movements guided by the music and the overwhelming happiness they felt. For Sophie, it was a moment of pure magic, a dream she hadn't dared to believe could come true. As they swayed together, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You've made me the happiest man in the world, Sophie." "And you've given me a life I never imagined," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you, Ethan." "I love you too," he said, his words a promise of everything they would build together. The next day, Sophie and Ethan shared their engagement with their loved ones and the community. Sophie's grandmother cried tears of joy when she saw the ring, pulling Ethan into a warm embrace. "You've made her so happy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's all I could ever ask for." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and Sophie's sweet haven became a hub of congratulations and well wishes. Customers and friends stopped by to offer their support, their excitement infectious. "You two are going to make the perfect team," one customer said, handing Sophie a bouquet of flowers. "You've already done so much for this community. I can't wait to see what's next." As the days turned into weeks, Sophie and Ethan began to plan their wedding. They decided on a ceremony that would reflect their journey, a celebration of love, resilience, and the community that had supported them. Sophie's shop became a flurry of activity as friends and neighbors pitched in to help with the preparations. Ethan marveled at the outpouring of support, his gratitude growing with each passing day. "This is what you've built," he told Sophie one evening as they worked on invitations together. "A community that truly cares about you." "And now, it's our community," Sophie replied, her smile radiant, "because you're a part of it too." As they finalized their plans, Sophie and Ethan decided to use their wedding as an opportunity to give back. Instead of traditional wedding gifts, they asked guests to contribute to the Sweet Futures Initiative, the program they had created to support local entrepreneurs. "We want this to be about more than just us," Sophie explained to a reporter who had come to cover the story. "It's a way to celebrate what we've been given by helping others achieve their dreams." The response was overwhelming, with donations pouring in from friends, family, and even strangers inspired by their story. By the time the wedding day arrived, the Sweet Futures Initiative had raised enough funds to support multiple new businesses in the community. As Sophie and Ethan stood together on the eve of their wedding, watching the sunset from the rooftop where Ethan had proposed, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "We've come a long way," Sophie said, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. "We have," Ethan agreed, his voice filled with gratitude. "And I can't wait to see where we go from here." With their hearts full and their future bright, Sophie and Ethan knew that their love was more than just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the belief that even the most broken paths can lead to something beautiful. The day of Sophie and Ethan's wedding dawned bright and clear, the early morning sun casting a golden glow over the city. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to make this day perfect. The garden venue, nestled in the heart of the neighborhood, had been transformed into a dreamscape of string lights, fresh flowers, and personal touches that reflected the couple's journey. Sophie woke early, her heart racing with anticipation. Her grandmother bustled about the rooms, helping Sophie into her wedding dress, a simple yet elegant gown that flowed like a whisper of silk. The dress had been custom-made by a local designer, someone Sophie had supported through the Sweet Futures Initiative. "You look radiant," her grandmother said, her voice filled with emotion as she adjusted the delicate lace sleeves. "Your parents would be so proud." Sophie turned to face her grandmother, tears welling in her eyes. "I wouldn't be here without you. You've always been my strength. And now, you have someone who will stand beside you," her grandmother replied, squeezing her hand. "Ethan is a good man. He loves you deeply." Across town, Ethan stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. His best man and longtime friend, James, watched with an amused grin. "Nervous?" James asked, handing Ethan a glass of water. Ethan chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "You have no idea. This day means everything to me." "Well, relax," James said, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've already done the hard part." Shehan said yes. "The rest is just formalities." Ethan smiled, taking a deep breath. "I just want everything to be perfect for her." Guests began arriving at the garden venue, greeted by the sweet aroma of Sophie's signature candies, displayed in small gift boxes at each seat. The setup was intimate yet grand, with rows of white chairs arranged around a floral arch that framed the couple's chosen spot. As the string quartet began to play, Ethan took his place at the altar, his heart pounding. He glanced at the crowd and felt a wave of gratitude for the people who had come to celebrate with them. Friends, family, and members of the community who had supported Sophie and her shop. When Sophie appeared at the end of the aisle, a collective gasp rippled through the audience. She was a vision of beauty and grace, her smile radiant as she walked arm in arm with her grandmother. Ethan's breath caught as their eyes met. In that moment, all the doubts and challenges they had faced melted away, leaving only the certainty of their love. Standing together beneath the floral arch, Sophie and Ethan exchanged vows that reflected the depth of their journey. "Sophie," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "you've taught me what it means to truly love. You've shown me strength, resilience, and kindness in ways I never thought possible. Today, I promise to stand by your side through every challenge and every joy, to support your dreams as if they were my own, and to love you with all that I am." Tears glistened in Sophie's eyes as she replied, "Ethan, you came into my life when I least expected it, and you turned my world upside down in the best possible way. You've shown me that love is about partnership, forgiveness, and unwavering support. I promise to trust you, to believe in us, and to love you with my whole heart." The officiant smiled warmly. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride." As their lips met, the audience erupted into cheers and applause, their joy palpable in the crisp afternoon air. The reception was held at Sophie's Sweet Haven, transformed into a magical venue, adorned with twinkling lights and floral arrangements. Guests mingled and danced, enjoying a menu of locally sourced dishes, and of course, Sophie's famous candies. The highlight of the evening was the couple's first dance. As they swayed to the soft melody of their chosen song, the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in their own world. "You make me feel like I can do anything," Sophie whispered, resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. "That's because you can," Ethan replied, his voice filled with admiration. "And I'll be here to remind you of that every single day." The celebration wasn't just about Sophie and Ethan. It was a reflection of the community they had built together. Several recipients of the Sweet Futures initiative were present, sharing stories of how the program had changed their lives. The gratitude and hope in their words reminded everyone of the power of generosity and collaboration. Ethan and Sophie took turns speaking with guests, their smiles never wavering. Sophie's grandmother watched from her seat, her heart full, as she observed the love and unity surrounding her granddaughter. "This is more than I ever dreamed for her," she said to a neighbor. "She's found her happiness and her purpose." As the evening drew to a close, Ethan stood to address the crowd. "Sophie and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "This isn't just our celebration. It's a celebration of everything we've accomplished together as a community." Sophie joined him, taking the microphone. "We're also thrilled to announce that, thanks to your generosity, the Sweet Futures Initiative has already funded 5 new small businesses in our neighborhood. This is just the beginning of what we can achieve together." The room erupted into applause, the energy electric as guests toasted to the couple and their shared vision for the future. As the last guest departed and the lights dimmed, Sophie and Ethan sat together on the shop's front steps, reflecting on the day. "It was perfect," Sophie said, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. "I couldn't have asked for anything more." Ethan smiled, his arm wrapped around her. "You deserve all of this and more, Sophie. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." They sat in comfortable silence, the city around them quiet and still. For Sophie and Ethan, the day had been more than a celebration of their love. It was a testament to the strength of their journey and the promise of a bright future. The weeks following their wedding felt like the beginning of a new life for Sophie and Ethan. The excitement of their union, combined with the success of Sophie's Sweet Haven and the Sweet Futures initiative, gave them a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they were ready to tackle the challenges of life while continuing to uplift those around them. Their mornings began with shared laughter over coffee in their cozy apartment. Sophie often found herself marveling at how much her life had changed. The small, worn-down house she had once shared with her grandmother was now a cherished memory, a testament to how far she had come. Ethan, too, was adjusting to this new chapter. The once lonely millionaire was now part of a partnership that filled his days with meaning. One morning, as they prepared to open the shop, Ethan looked at Sophie with a thoughtful expression. "I was thinking," he began, "what if we expanded Sweet Futures to include mentorship programs? We could pair experienced business owners with people just starting out." Sophie's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. There's so much more we can do to support people beyond just funding. Let's start planning." Sophie and Ethan worked tirelessly to grow the Sweet Futures initiative. They hosted community workshops on entrepreneurship, invited guest speakers to share their expertise, and even launched a scholarship program for young people pursuing business-related education. Their efforts were met with overwhelming enthusiasm. One recipient, a single mother named Maria, opened a successful bakery with the grant she received. During an event at the candy shop, she stood before the crowd and shared her story. "I never thought I could do this," Maria said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But Sophie and Ethan believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. They didn't just give me money. They gave me hope." Sophie wiped away a tear as she listened, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Ethan reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "This is why we do what we do," he whispered. As their professional lives flourished, Sophie and Ethan made a conscious effort to nurture their relationship. They set aside time each week for date nights, exploring new restaurants, hiking trails, and even taking cooking classes together. One evening, as they strolled through the park where they had first met, Sophie turned to Ethan with a playful smile. "Remember when you used to pretend to be a struggling artist?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think I'll ever live that down." "Probably not," Sophie teased, her laughter filling the air. "But I'm glad you took the risk. It brought us here." Ethan stopped walking and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I'd do it all over again, if it meant ending up with you." Despite their successes, life wasn't without its difficulties. Running the Sweet Futures initiative, managing the candy shop, and maintaining their personal lives often left Sophie and Ethan feeling stretched thin. One particularly stressful week, a major shipment of candy supplies was delayed, throwing the shop's schedule into chaos. "I can't believe this is happening," Sophie said, pacing the shop as Ethan tried to console her. "We have orders to fill, and now we're going to let people down." "We'll figure it out," Ethan assured her. "Let's make a list of what we can do with the supplies we have and communicate with our customers about the delay. People will understand." Sophie took a deep breath, nodding. "You're right. Let's tackle this together." Their teamwork paid off, and the crisis was averted. The experience reminded them of the importance of leaning on each other during tough times. As Sweet Futures grew, Sophie and Ethan became known as pillars of the community. They organized charity events, supported local schools, and helped refurbish the neighborhood park. One summer, they hosted a block party outside Sophie's Sweet Haven, complete with live music, games, and plenty of candy. The event was a resounding success, bringing together people from all walks of life. Children laughed as they competed in sack races, teenagers volunteered to serve food, and neighbors bonded over shared meals. Sophie and Ethan watched from the sidelines, their hearts full. "This is what it's all about," Sophie said, leaning against Ethan, "creating a space where people feel connected and supported." Ethan nodded, his arm draped around her shoulders. "And it's all because of you, Sophie. You've brought so much light to this community and to my life." As the year drew to a close, Sophie and Ethan hosted a holiday gathering at the shop. The space was adorned with twinkling lights, festive decorations, and the sweet aroma of peppermint and chocolate. Friends, family, and community members gathered to celebrate the season and reflect on the past year. Midway through the evening, Ethan stood to make an announcement. "Sophie and I want to thank all of you for your support and encouragement. This year has been incredible, and it's all because of this amazing community. We're thrilled to announce that next year, we'll be opening a second location for Sophie's Sweet Haven." The room erupted into cheers and applause as Sophie joined Ethan, her excitement evident. "This new location will allow us to bring our mission to even more people," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "We can't wait to see what the future holds." As the gathering wound down and guests began to leave, Sophie and Ethan stood together in the quiet shop, reflecting on everything they had accomplished. The journey had been far from easy, but every challenge had brought them closer together and strengthened their resolve to make a difference. "What's next for us?" Sophie asked, her gaze thoughtful. "Whatever we dream up," Ethan replied with a grin. "As long as we're together, I know we can handle anything." Sophie smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Then let's keep dreaming, Ethan. There's so much more we can do." Under the glow of the shop's lights, surrounded by the remnants of a joyful evening, Sophie and Ethan looked ahead to a future filled with love, purpose, and endless possibilities. As Sophie and Ethan's journey comes to a close, we're reminded that life's greatest treasures aren't found in material wealth, but in the connections we build, the challenges we overcome, and the love we share. Their story shows us that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, there's always hope for a brighter future. What did you think of Sophie and Ethan's incredible journey? Did their story resonate with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how their journey inspired or moved you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll never miss a moment of our heartwarming tales that celebrate resilience, kindness, and the power of human connection. Stay tuned. Our next story will take you on another emotional journey that you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.